Sometimes people ask me how I can get so much done on my project cars when their cars are still collecting cobwebs. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, it's kind of my job. It's how I make money. Sweet job. But more importantly, I have gotten really good at doing one thing as a means of not doing another thing. I was not super looking forward to doing the interior on the Jag, which made it really easy to spend all of last year building an entire race car. But now, I am very much not looking forward to making the fiberglass body on the land speed car, so by comparison, the Jag interior seems like a fun project. So let's do that instead. These are sometimes called door panels. I think they're usually called door panels, but I've always called them door cards, and that's what they're called in England, and this is a British car, so we're going to go with door cards. They are essentially a thin piece of wood wrapped in vinyl or leather with some holes through for controls to open the door and roll down the window. Modern door cards are usually plastic molded in 3 dimensions with multiple pieces, sometimes partly covered in leather, but they are essentially the same thing. For nearly 100 years, there has been a metal door inner panel with a few holes in it where the door card snaps in with some clips sealing off the gross inside of the door from the clean inside of the car. The cards in the Jag were made with some pressed wood that kind of look like cardboard. These things don't usually hold up well over time. You can sometimes salvage them, but I chose to make new ones. The normal way to do this is to trace out what's left of the old one onto new material, but I chose to 3D scan it. I actually did this a while back when I had access to that really nice 3D scanner. This is a pretty difficult thing to scan with a cheap scanner because there's not a lot of unique geometry to keep the scanner located. If you don't have a nice scanner, you can set the card on some hard edges like a carpenter square and measure several points. In fact, that's actually what I did on the rear door because after I scanned it, I overwrote the file with the front door scan like an idiot. The door originally came with these clips. These kind of claw into the board and have a retaining feature that holds onto the door sticking out of it. I upgraded these. These don't need to hook into the door card, they just hook around a slot that you cut into the door card. And then this part goes through the hole in the door. I don't actually know why I used these. If I was doing this again, I'd use plastic clips like these, and then I'd have a pattern cut into the door card like this and slide them on. These kind of suck because they always break when you remove the door card, no matter how careful you are, but I would have just written the part number on the back of the card, or perhaps tape 5 of them in a bag inside the door to be a total bro to future Matt, or future whoever opens the door. Anyway, these will also work. I just kind of went from the outdated British solution to the outdated American solution. These are kind of nice in that they are usually reusable and they hold the door securely enough, but not so much that the edge gets caught, forcing you to destroy the whole door card getting it out. So that's nice. To hold these in, I'll need a small feature in the door card. I made these little squares with rounded corners. This is good enough, but it's not the best shape. I should really have extended it longer this way to allow for the clip to easily fit in, and then here I could have added some more area to move the pin around in case it wasn't located perfectly. I can pull in this point here to make sure the pin is secured. You see this in manufacturing a lot. Like a pin in a hole would be called a 4-way because it's constrained in all 4 directions. A pin in a slot would be called a 2-way because it's only constrained in 2 directions. This is sort of a mix between a 2-way and a 4-way, so it's called a 3-way. So be sure to show your spouse or partner this shape and ask them how they feel about a 3-way. To get these in the right location, I offset the square from the original pin location. Since these clips are offset from their mounting hole, I just measured that distance from the clips in the scan. On the rear door, where I didn't have the scan, I measured the X and Y location of each pin on the old door card and then offset the square in CAD from that point. Once I had the CAD, I uploaded it to SendCutSend, who cut it out of hardboard for me. I did have to split the cards into 2 pieces each to fit within the size limit, more on that in a minute. I chose hardboard for a couple of reasons. One, it's super inexpensive. All 4 door cards laser cut exactly to my design and shipped to my door was about $150. ABS plastic would have been about 4 times as expensive. This stuff is great for prototyping and anything that doesn't need a lot of structure. It also staples and glues really easily, so it's easy to make new panels with. There was a size limit that was just slightly smaller than what I needed. This is pretty easily fixed with a zigzag pattern, some fiberglass tape, and some cheap epoxy resin. One of the drawbacks compared to ABS is that the hardboard is water resistant, but definitely not waterproof. These will be on the dry side of the door, but just for good measure, I sealed them up with some cheap outdoor wood sealer I had lying around. There are 3 other pieces that I had made while I was at it. There is a piece between the 2 doors that I'll need to replace, a larger piece in front of the front door that goes near the side of the pedals, and one more that goes on the side behind the rear door. This one actually has some padding in it and some extra wood to make it 3-dimensional. I might just do this when I do the rear seat, which I am not looking forward to. This might be the thing I procrastinate on that gets me to do the body on the land speed car. This one that goes between the doors seems the simplest, so I started with that one. I traced out the shape with some overhang to wrap around the back of the hardboard. I cut out some triangles to make it easier to stretch around this corner. This vinyl is somewhat flexible, but not a lot. I sprayed some spray adhesive on both sides and then stuck it together. I used 3M Super 90 on this. They also make this upholstery adhesive that seems to be basically the same thing. They have other adhesives, but I recommend 90. Super 77 is more of a suggestion than an adhesive. After you spray, you have to wait a minute or so for the adhesive to get tacky. You can test this by touching it. This is good adhesive, but that means you need to be careful how you set your parts down. If you set it down wrong, you better peel it back real quick. Anyway, I glued the vinyl on and wrapped it around the back, and I stapled it down. There were 3 things that I messed up on here. One is that I glued the vinyl directly to the board instead of using foam in between. I'll be using foam on the doors, but this piece didn't originally come with any backing, so I thought I'd just keep it simple, but it looks a little cheap, so I might redo this. The second problem would not have been a problem with the foam, but the staples are barely too long. You can see them just slightly pushing on the back of the vinyl. Also, the holes aren't perfect, so the screw goes in at a little bit of an angle up here at the top. I'll probably remake these later, but for now, they're good enough. Probably good enough that I will never actually remake them. Only time will tell. Next up are the kick panels. These are also pretty simple, but the shape is a little complex. The big hole in the middle here is for a vent that you can flop open to direct cool air to your junk on hot days. I test fit one of these because the scan I got off the old one wasn't great, because the old one, it was pretty rough. Anyway, I marked a few places on the trim and I brought them back in and trimmed them. I tried to make the holes for the screws in exactly the same location, but it's never going to be exact, and this is mostly just sheet metal anyway, so I'm just going to drill new holes and use some self-tapping screws. These did get the foam. I spray adhesived them on and then cut the perimeter out. Then I wrapped the vinyl around and stapled it down. I had a few people tell me I should go with leather on this car, but I went with vinyl instead, partly because it didn't originally come with leather, but mostly because I think leather is just kind of weird. I'm not anti-leather, but it always seemed a little odd to me, the idea of wrapping the whole interior of a car in the skin of a dead animal, especially when I'll be the one doing the wrapping. Also, modern faux leather materials beat leather in every possible metric and usually come out ahead in subjective blind tests. So I'm gonna go with the plastic stuff, but you do you. Anyway, these kick panels came out great. I had to put them in and take them out a couple of times to get the carpet trimmed and the dash bracket adjusted, but they look great. I normally like to think that I have some expertise on the videos I make, but I don't really know anything about redoing upholstery. I'm totally winging it here. Not great, but not bad for a rookie. On to the doors. The doors are basically the same, but with an added twist. You see, the doors have piping. Fancy pants trim. The stuff expensive luxury cars are made of. Turns out all this is just a piece of upholstery folded over a cord shoved in there like a taco. Then you just sew it shut and you have piping. To do this, I had to get a sewing machine, and as much as I like buying tools, I don't think I'm going to be doing a whole lot of sewing in the future, so I just borrowed one from my friend Jared over at J&H Classics. He has used this machine to restore lots of old car interiors, so I know it's capable. I started by adding the foam to the board with some spray adhesive, and then I tested my clips and ran into a problem. The foam does not hide the clip. It bulges the foam away, which is definitely going to show through onto the vinyl. So I decided to cut out a little square for the vinyl clips to sit in, but I didn't want these squares to be visible through the cover, so I added some tape over them to make it seamless. With the foam on and the clip relief trimmed, I cut out the vinyl in 3 pieces for the door. The rear door has a straight section of piping near the bottom. That seems easy, so I'll start with that. Here's my plan. Looking at a cross-section view of the rear door card, we can see the hardboard, the foam, and the vinyl. This middle section here is just flat vinyl, but the piping has these legs sticking down. Also, the bottom piece of vinyl will need to be sewn into the piping and then folded over. So right here, I have 4 layers of vinyl all piled up. 4 layers of vinyl is about 1/8 of an inch thick. The foam I'm using is also 1/8 of an inch thick, so I'm just going to add an extra piece of foam under the bottom part. I think it'll look better too, add some dimensionality to the door. Sometimes people will fold the legs of the piping on either side, so you have a little bit here and a little bit here, but I have a feeling that's just going to show through on both sides. Initially, I tried stapling the piping down, thinking I could staple it all together, but it became pretty clear that this was not going to work. It just warped the material and looked like garbage, so I decided to sew it together. This actually worked really well, way better than I was expecting for me having basically never sewed anything in my life before. The trick to this was double-sided tape. You lay the tape down, then lay the piping down on top of it, then another layer of tape, and then the top piece. I set the top piece in place and just kind of folded it under. This was really easy on the bottom straight piping, but was a little more difficult on the top curved piece. With it all taped together, I just folded it to one side and sewed it together. Kind of tricky, but not too bad since the machine has a foot with a recess designed to guide the piping. With that panel all sewed, With that panel all done sewn together, it was time to get on to the next panel. First I trimmed off the extra vinyl coming off the piping so it was all straight and flush. Then I lined up the cover, sprayed on some adhesive, and glued the foam down in place. I was a little timid with the spray adhesive on the first door, and this was a mistake. I didn't want to spray too much in case I needed to move it, but I should have just gone all in. The vinyl pulled back from the foam a bit near the piping. It's not terrible, but I didn't make this mistake on the other doors. With the middle glued down, I cut out the foam for the top and bottom, glued it down, and trimmed it flush with the piping and edge of the hardboard. I sprayed the tops and bottoms down and then flipped it over to wrap the edges around. After some stapling and trimming, the door card was done. 1 down, 3 to go. The front cards are a little more complicated. They have a zipper storage bag as part of the door. Neat, but basically useless to me. And since I'm an upholstery rookie, I decided to leave it on the easy mode and skip the zipper bags. I noticed that some Mark V cars don't have bags in the doors. I don't know if this was a choice by someone who rebuilt the car, or if it was an option, or maybe it wasn't available on the convertibles. Either way, there are some cars with this nice little curved S shape, which is perfectly acceptable to me. I did briefly consider doing a quilting pattern on the bottom half. I think it would have looked nice, but I'm always a fan of simple, and I like the simplicity of these doors. The S-shaped curve was a bit more of a challenge to get right. I used the tape like last time, but I had to be more careful with the sewing. It didn't come out exactly flat, but the material was stretchy enough to make it work. The only part I really don't like about this door is that you can see the tails of the folded over vinyl underneath. I had added foam to make these somewhat flush, but it wasn't enough. On the second door, I taped over the seam to hide it, and that helped a lot. This sort of disappears depending on how you look at it. Unfortunately, sitting in the car looking down at it seems to be the worst. But you can actually also see it on the old door cards as well, so maybe we'll just call it a feature. With all the cards done, it was time to install them in the car. But first up is a plastic barrier to keep the dry side dry. I used that double-sided tape to hold it in place and trimmed around the edges. The Jag did not originally come with this plastic, but you see it on basically all newer cars. I'm guessing plastic technology wasn't quite there in the late 1940s. Then it was time to snap on the door. All of my door clips were in the right place, except one. I had to remove that one, but that's fine. With the door in place, I trimmed out the holes for the door handle and for the window roller downer thing. Window crank? It's probably called a window crank. Remember these things? I got in and shut the door to check the fit on the seal, or where the seal would be if I had the seal in the car. Everything looks good. You can see from this angle that the seam is just super obvious. I might actually peel this back and add tape over like the other side. But overall, not bad. The rear door card went on easy, but I had a problem when I tried to shut the door. The card is catching on the body. It's really just right here where I have a bunch of vinyl folded up. I could maybe trim that down and wrap it around the back to get rid of this bump, or I could unstaple the vinyl and trim the actual door card. I might do that. This needs to be done pretty soon so I can actually close the door. This seems to only be a problem on one side, which is a little odd. The doors also have this piece of vinyl that's just spray adhesived to the actual door structure, so I just cut these out, sprayed it on, and stuck it on there. I'd like to add a little bit of tape or something on this edge in the future to make it a little more secure, but it's good enough for now. Some of you might be noticing that the top part here looks very unfinished. Well, that's because there is a wood trim piece that goes up here, and I have not gotten around to remaking that piece. This is the old wood piece, 2 of them actually, 4 in the rear. There is the main horizontal piece, the top piece, the ashtray, and the mount for this quarter window thing. Also, I need to fix this part since it's not working anymore. So, woodworking is the next part, and fixing the right rear door panel interface with the door. I do have the wood ready to go, so that might be next, along with the dash and the instrument panel, but that is a story for another time. I'm sure there's some stuff I got wrong here, and if you have any advice, throw it in the comments. Be sure to hit that thumbs up. The algorithm will be pleased. Thanks for watching.